When a man was simply helping an elderly neighbor with her groceries, a neighbor from the HOA decided to declare war on him. But what happened after her latest stunt left the entire neighborhood speechless. You ever have one of those mornings where the birds chirp just a little too loud, like they know something's coming you don't? That was me, Tuesday, 6:08 a.m., holding a bag of groceries in one hand and a lukewarm travel mug of peppermint tea in the other, looking out at the same gravel driveway I've walked 1,000 times. I wasn't looking for trouble. I sure didn't ask for it. But trouble? It knew my name, my address, and my dog's vet appointment. My name's Samuel D. Carter. 62. Retired firefighter, South Central born and bred, proud homeowner out here in one of those blended communities where HOA folks like to think they run the block, but forget there's still some of us who actually own our property outright. No mortgage. No association. No strings. And yet here I was, groceries in hand, walking them down to Ms. Florence next door, sweet woman, 91, legs swollen like balloons from old age and worse luck. She hadn't left the house since her hip gave out last December, and don't nobody else on the street seem to give a damn if she eats more than saltines. So yeah, I bring her food. Hot meals sometimes. And I'm proud of it. I don't mind being that neighbor. I do mind her. Karen. Yeah, her name really is Karen. Karen West moved in about 10 months ago when the city sold off that patch of undeveloped lots behind my yard. She came with her $68,000 Tesla, her knockoff Prada bag, and enough printed-out HOA bylaws to wallpaper her guest bathroom. I clocked her on day one, stepping out her car in full yoga gear, squinting at my free firewood sign like it was a public health hazard. She had that look. You know the one. Like she smelled something bad and just realized it was democracy. I tried. Lord knows I tried. Waved at her every morning for 3 weeks straight. Offered her tomatoes from my garden once. She said, I don't eat homegrown. Who doesn't eat homegrown? Anyway, this particular morning, I'm halfway down my driveway, dog trotting behind me. Gray, my sweet, aging Doberman, wouldn't bite a squirrel unless it owed him money, and I hear it. Excuse me. I stopped mid-step. I knew the voice. Sounded like someone blended decaf rage with a dash of superiority complex. Karen stood at the edge of my property, arms crossed, phone already filming like she was auditioning for some HOA version of Cops. Are you delivering items to unauthorized residents again? Now see, that right there? That wasn't just nosy. That was targeted. That was code. She didn't mean unauthorized. She meant Miss Florence. Old, black, and inconvenient to her HOA fantasy. I took a slow sip of my tea before responding. Morning to you, too, Karen. I'm taking groceries to a neighbor. That all right with you and your committee? She huffed. She actually huffed. You are enabling dependency. We have community standards. Your actions set a precedent for others to treat this area like a food pantry. Lord, grant me the patience not to toss this organic spinach straight at her front porch. You hear that, Gray? I looked at my dog. We out here turning the block into a soup kitchen. Shame on us. Karen's eyes narrowed. You are not part of our HOA jurisdiction. But your property usage affects our collective environment. I will be filing a report. Do that. And make sure to spell my name right when you type it in your little group chat. I left her there, still recording like she was building a case for Judge Judy. Dropped the groceries at Ms. Florence's, made her laugh with a story about a stray chicken that broke into my garage once, true story, and headed back. That's when I noticed it. Something glinting in the gravel. Something new. Something sharp. At first, I thought maybe a construction nail. We had cruised out by the main road last week, laying fresh asphalt. But no, these weren't nails. These were spikes. Metal teeth, planted right where the driveway curves. Buried flush, just enough to catch a tire and tear it like wrapping paper. I froze. I squatted down to inspect them, professionally drilled into the ground, bolted, polished. That wasn't random. That wasn't kids playing. That was installed. That was sabotage. I stood slowly, looked left. And sure enough, across the street on her porch, sipping a green smoothie like she was innocent and enlightened, sat Karen. She gave me a little wave. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Something I'd been holding back. Call it my firefighter gut instinct. You know when danger ain't just a concept anymore, it's a fact. A line has been crossed. I called the police. The officer who showed up was young. Too young. Didn't even know how to tuck his badge in properly. So, someone installed these in your driveway? Looks like it. I pointed down. That there ain't an accident. That's deliberate. And dangerous. He scratched his head. Do you have any idea who might have done it? I looked him dead in the eye. Son, this ain't CSI. It's the suburbs. And Karen over there hasn't blinked since I found him. He walked over to speak to her. I watched from a distance, arms crossed. She greeted him like she'd been rehearsing. Yes, officer, I was involved in installing the tire deterrents. With HOA approval. It's a shared boundary and we were advised to prevent unauthorized vehicle flow. Unauthorized vehicle flow? Lord have mercy. She'd turned my driveway into a security checkpoint. I showed the officer my deed. Highlighted my property line. The HOA doesn't extend a centimeter onto my land. He nodded. Took some pictures. Filed a report. Said someone from code enforcement would follow up. And then? He left. No spikes removed. No fines. Just a folder full of photos and a polite goodbye. I stood there in my yard, gray beside me, heart-thudding with frustration. Not just because someone booby-trapped my driveway, but because the system I thought would protect me just shrugged. Next 48 hours? Hell in khakis. Karen went full offense. I started seeing her concerned resident posts all over the neighborhood Facebook group. Suspicious behavior from non-HOA property owners. Possible unregistered dog. Possible elderly hoarding situation. Hoarding? Miss Florence can barely hold a spoon. I had folks driving slow past my house, snapping pics like I was a zoo exhibit. One woman yelled from her car, "Is your dog vaccinated?" It didn't stop there. Someone dumped raw chicken skins on my lawn. Trash bins knocked over. My Amazon packages started arriving with the tape peeled off. I called the HOA. They said they had no authority over my parcel. But you know what they did say? We do encourage mutual cooperation. Perhaps reconsider how visible your activities are. My activities? Feeding a hungry elder and walking my dog? That's when I knew. This wasn't about property lines. This was about control. About fear. About the unspoken truth they'd never put in writing but carry in their posture and passive-aggressive smiles. And I wasn't gonna shrink for anybody. Not now. Not ever. To be continued. What happened next changed everything. You don't want to miss how deep this mess goes and what I had to do to finally push back. There's something about being pushed, I mean really pushed, that makes your bones remember who you are. I didn't serve 20 years as a firefighter pulling people out of smoke-choked buildings just to get disrespected on my own front lawn by someone who thinks kale is a personality. But that's exactly what Karen West kept doing. Not with fire or fists, no. Karen had a different kind of weapon, paperwork, HOA flyers, and just enough smug to float a hot air balloon. Let me tell you what happened the very next morning after the spike incident. I get up early like always. Sun wasn't even fully up yet. I go outside to check the damage again, same driveway, same mess. Tire tracks from where I had to pull my truck into the grass, shrapnel from where one of the spikes snapped off. It still looked like a crime scene, minus the caution tape. I was halfway through photographing the damage with my old phone when I noticed movement across the street. Karen. In a bathrobe this time. Coffee mug in one hand, dog leash in the other. She owns a tiny white poodle named Sparkle, which honestly tracks. She watched me take photos like I was a criminal casing my own joint. I called out loud enough for the street to hear. You planning on calling the cops again, or just enjoying the view? She sipped her coffee. Didn't blink. I'm documenting potential environmental hazards. The community has concerns. The community. I looked around. It was 6:17 in the morning. Only thing awake besides me was a confused squirrel in my oak tree and probably some HOA group chat she'd already spammed at dawn. I went back inside. Sat down. And for the first time in a long time I felt it, not just irritation but something heavier. That slow-boiling kind of fury. The kind that starts in your chest and works its way into your teeth. I tried to brush it off. Tried to distract myself. Watered the garden. Fed Gray. Answered emails. I even started drafting a letter to the city about unauthorized installations on private land. But none of it helped. Because every few minutes my brain would flash back to that moment. Her standing there, coffee in hand, like she owned me. She didn't just set spikes in the ground. She'd put them in my peace. My sense of safety. And what happened next? That wasn't some coincidence. That was escalation. Later that day, around noon, I walked out to get the mail. My box sits at the edge of the property, right near the sidewalk. And what do I see? A new sign, hammered into the ground, right next to my mailbox. Notice, this property is under HOA monitoring. Violations will be reported. I blinked twice, then 3 times, then took a photo because at this point that's all I could do. I ripped the sign out the ground. The pole was still warm from the sun, and I'll be honest with you, I almost bent it over my knee like a twig. But I didn't. I just carried it inside and leaned it against the living room wall like a trophy. Gray sat next to it and looked up like, "You gonna do something yet?" Or, by 3 p.m., I'd had enough. I walked across the street to Karen's place. Calm, respectful, but with thunder in my stride. Knocked twice. Waited. She opened the door halfway. "Can I help you? We're gonna settle this neighbor to neighbor. You put spikes in my driveway. You put a fake HOA sign by my mailbox. This isn't just petty. It's harassment." She crossed her arms. "I have every right to protect my home and my surroundings. Your property impacts community values. Your dog is intimidating. Your presence unsettles some residents." And there it was. Not "you're loud." Not "you're messy." Not "you break rules." Your presence. That's when I knew exactly what kind of war this was. I nodded slowly. "Let me make one thing clear, Karen. I've lived here 27 years. I pay my taxes. I mow my lawn. I take care of my neighbors. I'm not going anywhere. You can take your fake signs, your HOA ghost rules, and your little camera phone, and find a better use for your time." She slammed the door in my face, and I walked home with my heartbeat tapping out a drum solo. The next morning, the retaliation came fast. My trash didn't get picked up. Everyone else on the street, bins emptied. Mine, still full. I called the city. They claimed they had no record of my pickup being missed. When I asked if someone had maybe called in a complaint or a change, the man on the line cleared his throat and said, "I can't say who, but someone did request a suspension." I laughed. I actually laughed out loud. Karen had suspended my trash pickup. This woman was playing chess with garbage. Later that evening, I found more than that waiting for me. Someone had spray-chalked "unsafe" in bright neon letters at the base of my driveway, like I was a condemned building. And let me be clear, this wasn't just some random vandalism. No one else on the block got tagged. Just me. Just the old guy who brings groceries to Miss Florence and refuses to roll over for power-drunk yoga warriors. That night, I couldn't sleep. Gray kept pacing the house. My stomach wouldn't settle. I sat on the porch until past midnight, just listening. Watching. It felt like my neighborhood had turned into a courtroom, and I was on trial for minding my own business. A few days later, I got a knock at the door. Two folks in button-downs with clipboards and brittle smiles. "Mr. Carter? That's me. We're with the Neighborhood Watch Advisory Board. We'd like to ask a few questions about your property activity." Now look, I'm no stranger to polite faces hiding real motives. I've had insurance adjusters, realtors, and even church folks try to survey my land under the guise of interest. But this was different. This was coordinated. They asked me about noise levels, about lawn length, about community concerns regarding visual uniformity. One of them pointed at my flagpole and said, "That's technically above the permitted height limit for poles in adjacent parcels." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean on HOA land?" He hesitated. "Well, it's just generally recommended. Recommended doesn't mean enforced. And unless you brought a badge or a warrant, you can go ahead and recommend your way back to where you came from." They left. And as I stood in the doorway, watching them scribble notes into clipboards like I just confessed to something, I felt something shift again. Not just in me, in the street, in the air. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about how easily a system could turn on you when the wrong person was handed just enough power to make it legal. Karen wasn't just a nosy neighbor. She was the system, or at least she thought she was. And the system had declared me a problem. I ended that week the same way I started it, bringing groceries to Miss Florence. But this time, she wouldn't even open the door all the way. "They came by," she said quietly. "Told me there was an unauthorized presence around here. Told me not to open the door for strangers." That stung. Not because she believed it, I could tell she didn't, but because she felt scared enough not to challenge it. This neighborhood, my neighborhood, was starting to look less like home and more like enemy territory. And I knew deep down Karen wasn't done. Not by a long shot. This is the turning point. Everything you've been waiting for is coming up next, the moment the game changes. Stay with me. You don't want to miss what happens when the line finally gets crossed. You ever feel like you're walking around your own house like a stranger? Like the floor you paid for with your own sweat, the walls you painted yourself suddenly feel borrowed? That was me. That was the third week of dealing with Karen. I had spent 2 decades running into burning buildings for people I never met, dragging out kids, saving pets, comforting grieving families on street corners. And yet somehow in my so-called blended neighborhood, I was the threat. It didn't matter that I was the one cutting Florence's grass when the city stopped coming. Didn't matter that I was the first to show up when someone's pipe burst last winter and water was flooding their foyer. I was unsettling, non-compliant, concerning to the community. And Karen? She was the queen of that concerned community. Crown and clipboard. The chalk on my driveway didn't stop. Neither did the camera phone pointed at my door every time I stepped outside. I took it for a while, told myself to breathe, be bigger, rise above. But that ain't always the answer. Sometimes silence ain't peace, it's permission. And I was done giving it. The breaking point came on a Thursday. Started like any other, me on the porch, coffee in hand, gray curled up at my feet. Sunrise painting the sky the kind of pink you can only see when you've lived long enough to wake up without an alarm. And then metal grinding. I turned my head just in time to see 2 men in reflective vests and hard hats walking up my driveway with a set of drills, a roll of yellow caution tape, and I kid you not, a full-size security camera. I stood up. Can I help y'all? One of them checked his clipboard like he was ordering a sandwich. We're here to install a safety surveillance unit for the HOA. Work order says it goes right at the corner of the driveway. I took 3 steps forward, slow. You realize this ain't HOA land, right? He glanced up. We were told it's a shared security corridor. A what now? I looked past him, and sure enough, across the street stood Karen, arms folded, sipping her tea like she was at a pageant and her contestant just won. I walked straight down the driveway. Calm on the outside, storm on the inside. You called a crew to install surveillance on my land? Karen blinked like I'd asked her about her skincare routine. The neighborhood voted. It's for mutual safety. Mutual safety from what, Karen? She smiled. From unpredictable behavior. There it was again. That coded language. The kind that sounds polite until you peel it back and find the rot underneath. That's when I said it. You want to talk unpredictable? You show up 1 more inch on my property without paperwork and you'll find out what my lawyer's handwriting looks like. She scoffed. Threatening legal action won't make you any more neighborly, Samuel. Neither will sabotaging my driveway, trespassing with cameras, or turning an old woman into a target because she eats canned soup and can't do Pilates. Her jaw tightened. But I didn't wait for her to respond. I turned to the workers. Y'all can either pack that camera up and leave now or explain to the sheriff why you're installing private surveillance on private land. They paused. One of them looked real uncomfortable. And finally, they backed off. Took their gear, walked down the block. One muttered, man, this whole job weird. No lie told. But Karen? Oh, she didn't stop. She just got smarter. The next day, I get a visit from animal control. Apparently, someone had anonymously reported my dog as aggressive, underfed, and unlicensed. Gray, my 13-year-old, half-deaf, biscuit-fed sweetheart who once let a toddler ride him like a pony at the neighborhood cookout. Aggressive? I showed them his medical records. Vaccination logs. The hand-painted tag Ms. Florence made for his collar that said, good boy forever. The officer smiled, shook his head, and left. But that visit, it stayed with me. Because Karen wasn't aiming to win anymore. She was aiming to break me. Turn the whole street against me. And for a moment, I'll admit it worked. I started to doubt myself. Started walking quieter. Avoiding eye contact. I skipped the store one day because I didn't want to drive over her sidewalk and give her another complaint to file. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just a neighbor feud. This was psychological warfare. And I wasn't playing anymore. The very next day, I called in a few favors. See, I might be retired, but I ain't disconnected. I still knew folks, real folks. Lawyers, veterans, pastors, community advocates. People who'd seen this kind of thing before. I gathered them on a Zoom call. Told them everything. The spikes. The signs. The surveillance attempt. The HOA tricks. The smear campaign. All of it. And I'll never forget what my old captain said. Man named Richard Gaines. Used to run into fires like they owed him money. He said, Sam, you're not dealing with a neighbor. You're dealing with someone who sees you as an intruder. You don't fix that with kindness. You fix that with action. Document. File. Push back legally. Publicly. I didn't sleep that night. Not from fear, from focus. Because now I had a plan. The very next morning, while Karen was busy measuring someone's lawn with a literal ruler, I was down at City Hall filing a formal trespass complaint. Then I went to the county recorder's office and pulled every parcel map I could. My property line, my easements, my access rights, every inch of land I legally owned. Then I printed them out, laminated them, and installed 2 bright red signs on my own property. Private driveway, not HOA land. Trespassers will be recorded and reported. Underneath, in smaller text, this driveway is under active legal investigation. Violators may be held liable. And just for good measure, I installed a camera of my own, pointed it at her house. Nothing illegal, I made sure it only captured the edge of my property. But let's just say she noticed. Later that day, I caught her pacing, looking, whispering with someone over the phone. That tight Karen look of disbelief when the system doesn't bend to her will. Then came the parade. I'm not joking. The local high school marching band had a city permit to do a community walkthrough for their senior send-off. And wouldn't you know it, their route passed right through my street. You should have seen it. Drums, saxophones, kids in purple and gold, parents clapping from porches. And me? I was front row in a lawn chair with Gray by my side. Karen? Karen stood on her porch in a visor and sunglasses, arms folded so tight you'd think they were welded. Nobody clapped with her. Nobody smiled. And when the band passed by and one of the kids shouted, "Hey, Mr. Carter," you could hear her teeth grinding from across the cul-de-sac. That's when I felt it. That shift. Not just in me in the street. In the people. The mail carrier waved again. The neighbors nodded. Even the recycling guy honked and gave me a thumbs up. They saw what was happening. And they'd had enough too. Karen wasn't the queen anymore. She was the caution sign. The warning. And all I had to do was stand. Long enough. Strong enough. Everything finally blew wide open. What came next? Nobody on that street saw it coming, especially Karen. And trust me, you'll want a front row seat when the cuffs come out. There's a peace that comes when the storm finally ends. Not right away. Not with fanfare or applause. Just that stillness in your bones, like your spirit finally got a seat at the table again. Let me tell you how that peace came to me. Let me tell you how Karen finally got what she spent all that time earning. It was the Monday after the parade. Sun came up the same as always, but the street, it felt different. Quieter. Like it was waiting on something. I stepped out onto my porch with Gray. My good boy still moved slow, but his ears perked up just enough when a squirrel darted across the yard. He gave it one half-hearted chase, then flopped right back down by my rocking chair. I was sipping hot lemon water. My knees ached like old lumber, but my mind was clear. That camera I'd installed, the one Karen thought was aimed at her? It had been busy. Real busy. See, while she thought she was recording me, I was recording everything. The trespassing. The harassment. Her whispering to that same maintenance crew again 3 days in a row, all without permits. And then the one move that sealed her fate like a stamp on a letter to the sheriff. She tried to have Florence removed from her home. Yes. You read that right. That Sunday evening, a knock came to Ms. Florence's door. 2 young folks in khakis and clipboards saying they were with Adult Community Safety and Code Review. They claimed they had the authority to inspect her home for hygiene violations. They weren't with the city. They weren't with the state. They were hired. By Karen. How do I know? One of them, a nervous-looking kid, no more than 23, walked straight across the street after being turned away and reported back to her porch. I saw the whole thing. Recorded the whole thing. And let me tell you, that broke the last thread holding my patience together. Florence called me 30 minutes later, voice trembling. They tried to tell me I had to leave. That I wasn't safe anymore. Safe? This woman has been in her home for 57 years. Raised 3 sons. Buried a husband. Paid taxes like clockwork. And now, because she lived next to someone who thinks the word community means people who look like me, she had strangers knocking on her door trying to make her leave? Not on my street. Not on my watch. I made 4 phone calls. 1 to my lawyer. 1 to my cousin Deshawn, who works in community development. 1 to the local news station. And 1 to the sheriff's office. All with the same message. You're gonna want to come see this. The sheriff arrived first. Deputy Wells. I'd met him once before when he responded to a noise complaint Karen filed because I played Stevie Wonder a little too loud on Juneteenth. This time, he came out his cruiser with a clipboard and a folder. Mr. Carter, he nodded. We reviewed the footage and your complaint. I think we're ready to have a chat with Ms. West. I didn't smile. Just stepped aside and let the law do what the law should have done weeks ago. They crossed the street. Knocked. Karen opened the door wearing a pink tracksuit and an attitude. What happened next? I didn't even need to be close enough to hear. Her voice carried. Like it always did. I've done nothing wrong. This is ridiculous. I am protecting our values. That man has been hostile since day one. Deputy Wells held up a stack of printed images from my footage. She froze, then turned, and saw me standing there, hands behind my back, not saying a word. That's when she knew. That camera? That wasn't just hardware. That was justice. They put her in cuffs. Not rough, not loud, just enough pressure to remind her she wasn't above the line anymore. Neighbors peeked out. Cars slowed. Even the Amazon driver leaned out the window and said, "About time." And me? I didn't gloat. I didn't cheer. I just looked her in the eye and said, "You messed with the wrong neighbor, Karen." They walked her to the cruiser. She didn't resist, pride wouldn't let her cry, but her eyes told the whole story. She thought she was untouchable. Turns out the only thing she was touching was consequences. In the weeks that followed, everything changed. The HOA went quiet, like a hornet nest after the smoke. Florence started getting mail again, real mail, not anonymous flyers. The local paper ran a piece titled, "A Neighborhood Divided and the Man Who Held His Ground." They interviewed me. I told them the truth. I didn't fight for revenge. I fought for peace. For Florence. For folks who pay their dues but still get treated like guests in their own homes. The paper quoted that line. It spread. Folks I didn't even know started honking and waving as they passed my house. A city official showed up with a fruit basket and a thank you letter. Even the mail carriers started dropping off dog treats in the mailbox for Gray. And the best part? The spikes got removed. City crew came out and tore every last one of them from the gravel, smoothed out the path, and apologized. They even offered to repave the whole thing. I declined. Told them, "I like the gravel. Reminds me of who I am. A little rough, but steady." They laughed. But I meant it. It's funny. All those weeks of being called a nuisance, a threat, a problem, and all I ever did was stand still. Stay rooted. Do what was right. In a world where folks like Karen still get handed the megaphone before you even open your mouth, sometimes you gotta speak with your presence. You gotta outlast the nonsense. You gotta prove that decency isn't weakness, it's power with patience. And when the cuffs finally click, when the camera flips back on them, you don't need to say, "I told you so." You just sit back, sip your lemon water, and let the peace wash over you like sunrise. The end.